A very good morning, everybody. Today we have a group of students making a presentation on an introduction written by Susan Bassnett in a book, Comparative Literature, a Critical Introduction. The title of the introduction is What is Comparative Literature Today? It means when this book is being written a few decades ago, uh, in 1993, the first edition of this book is released. 1993, we can say it is far away from today. We are much ahead, almost 3 decades ahead of the time when Susan Bassnett is writing about comparative literature today. That today is as old as 30 years now. So in this, but we will get a global perspective of looking at comparative literature. In the previous three presentations, we have seen articles written by Indian comparatists like Amiya Dev, Sisir Kumar Das, and an historical perspective by Shubha Dasgupta. Now we will see a global perspective, or what were the debates in the discipline of comparative literature in 1990s, that we will see today. So let us invite the group of presenters. Today we have I think 4 presenters. Yes, Rajdeep, Parthiv, Sagar and Jay. These 4 students will make a brief introductory presentation on the article, which is an introduction by Susan Bassnett to a book, Comparative Literature, a Critical Introduction, published first in 1993. You can start with the presentation.
So hello everyone, myself Jay Waghani, and today me and my team members are going to demonstrate introduction what is comparative literature today. So hello everyone, myself Jay Waghani, and today me and my team members are going to demonstrate introduction what is comparative literature today by Susan Bassnett. So here are academic and presentation details, table of content, abstracts. So initially defining the scope and current condition of comparative literature as a field by Susan, and she also asked that how this field is connect with contemporary era uh, to map historical debates, locate crisis, and suggest productive relations with the translation studies and global perspective. Uh, Historical surveys of debates, so reading of a crisis and critics and attentions to non-Western development and translation studies. As we see is that in this chapter there is a not only about Western ideas, but it is a cover the global perspective as well, and it is a growth in Asia. Crisis in the West, but growth in Asia. The rise of translation studies at call to reconcile comparative literature as a method rather than a fixed discipline. Uh, Here are some key points. Initially, comparative literature studies texts across cultures in interdisciplinary and tracks pattern of a connection in literature across both time and space. This field has long faced a crisis about its object, method, and disciplinary status. This crisis resurface repeatedly. Comparative literature's Western declines contrast with the expansions in China, India, Japan, and elsewhere, where national specificity is central. Translation studies has grown rapidly and challenges the traditional subordinations of translation within comparative literature. The future lies in treating comparative works as a method, reader centered, transfer sensitives, and globally alert rather than a narrowly bounded discipline. Here are some key arguments. Sooner or later, anyone who claims to be working in comparative literature has to try and answer the inevitable question: what is it? The term's apparent simplicity conceals a history of violent debate about scope, canon, and methods. Comparative literature is waning institutionally in the West, but thriving where national specificity and post-colonial concerns drive the field. Translation studies emergence require researching comparative literature's relations to translation. Neither may be a strict discipline, but both are manually informative methods. The act of comparing is a best understanding as a reading practices in which the reader's foregrounds, connections, and transfers during interpretation. Here are my learning outcomes. So initially, I uncertain about the field's limit, but now Susan is pushes me to appreciate that a comparative literature is best treated and flexible method that foregrounds connections across time, language, and culture rather than a fixed, narrowly bounded disciplines. I felt surprised and curious at how persistence the crisis debates is what seems like a historical worry turns out be recurring institutional anxiety that shapes scholarship and training. My assumptions about translations being merely technical and it also shift my perspective to research uh, that now I see is the translations and uh, translate translations and translations studies as central forces that restructure literary fields and deserves equal methodological weight. And it is comparison an act performed by readers. The reader's attention and choices produce comparative insight rather than comparison being a prefixed method. Now I would like to invite Parthi for further information.
So I deal with the historical background and early debate and definitions. Some major person he argue the about the what is the comparative literature in this essay. Is started with the early 19th and 20th century tension. Matthew Arnold world literature idea is the course uh, dimensional of the comparative literature as the arrived enduring and Gilles are the rejective this idea, and he's defined the comparative as the recognition of the literature and common human fictions, framing it as the initial expression of the humanity, and Franken just as the advantage sweeping view of the comparative literature as the humanitic ecology, or the Weltanschauung is the rather than narrative scholarship. This early tension set up of the two poles and idealistic unrealism, various skeptical and historical tension that continue into the Bassnett accounts. The crisis and theoretical shifts, how the perspective of the comparative literature are the change. Reason Oleg is the crisis of the comparative literature is the capturing the concern that the field lacked a stable method and the institutional footing since in the 1950. In structuralisms and psychologist reading response in the later theory of shifting tension from the comparing text to the figures of the readers and the instability of the single reading and Harry Lewis critics to the so much debate about the discipline and to the title actual the comparative reading by the late 1970 many graduate student turn in toward the theory of cultural studies and the woman studies trending and the comparative as a outbet. The result in intellectual difficulties in the comparative methods into the other field, even the departmental presence and declines in the part of the West. A global perspective and the non-Western growth. In the comparative literature explained the strongly in the China, Taiwan, Japan, and India and other regions, and the where the national specificity, not the universalism and structural programs. And the Svepan Mazmudar is the comparative literature is the appeal in the third world crisis in the study of the national literature and the cultural association. And the Homi Baba is post-colonial study product in the cross-cutting from the that area's simple disciplinary boundaries. In the Ole Sienka is an African critics expound the Hegelian denial of the African history, showing how the comparative method are the used contest Eurocentrism and hierarchies, and the global turn through the append of Eurocentrism assumption and the reframe the comparative literature as the decolonial practice in the many location. My learning outcome is the tracing the debate from the Arnold in the core to the well clarified for me that the comparative idea, unrealist world literature, and the careful historicism have the always driven in the field, identify and struggle. Uh, emotionally I move from the transferring in the assessment. I show the how non-western growth in India, China, Japan, Africa responsition comparative literature as the decolonial and the no nation sensitive perspectives. I had a confirmed that the disconfirmed of the realization Eurocentrism case categories and shaped much of the my peer learning is the promoted the concerned question about the who exists text we value and why, and a clear application from the my future work in corporate post-colonial critics and the world literature perspective to the avoid the product producing the imperial assumption in the comparative projects. And further analysis, I would like to call Sagar Bokadia.
Hello everyone. Today I'm dealing with ideology canon and the political of syllabus and translation study and comparative literature. Terry Eagleton literature and the institutional rise of English are ideological charges. Canon formation reflect a political choice. Edward said Orientalism demonstrated how the Orient was constructed discoverably, forcing competitors to comfort ideological invention. Teaching Shakespeare in post-colonial context exemplify the dilemma. Shakespeare is aesthetic master and the symbol of colonial power. Comparative curricula must balance colonial work with local literature and address colonization, translation, and the reception histories. The political of inclusion and exclusion remains central. Was texts are compared and why a matter institutionally and ethically. Translation studies rise and relation to comparative literature. Translation study has begun a rigorous and institutionalized since the 1970s. Translation is argued to be a major shaping force in cultural history. Polysystem theory, literature function as a network of interrelated system where translation can play a central or peripheral role. Bassnett proposal rejects translation plays why is with comparativism. Perhaps comparative literature is better understood as a branch of intercultural reading that include translation centrally. Large and other view as a translation study and comparative literature as a overlapping intercultural method rather than mutual exclusive discipline. Practical implication: comparative project should incorporate translation history, quality of translation, and circulation context in analysis. Methodological consideration, readers, transfer, and ethics. Foreground the readers. The act of comparing happens during the reading process itself. Recognize literary transfer. The field must track how texts move, are adapted, and are reinterpreted across the language and context. Mental linguistic rigor. Knowledge of source language depends comparative claims and prevents superficial equivalence. Ethical obligation. Comparative should avoid universalizing tendencies that erase local specificity and should practice attentive, context-sensitive reading, include emergent world literary knowledge to expand theoretical resource beyond Western epistemologies. And my learning outcome is now I recognize canon formation as a political teaching and research choice implication reproduce or constant power structure. To comparative work must include ideological self scrutiny. The methodological priority shifted for me toward linguistic competence and archival attention to translation without language skill. Comparative climb feel partial and risky. Emotionally, I felt both challenged and inaugurated by the idea that a translation study comparative literature should be collaborative and not antagonist. Remaining practical question for me is how to teach ethical comparative reading, how to access translation rigorously, and how to incorporate world literary knowledge into coursework. And I would like to invite Radip Bavalia for eventual part of our today's presentation.
Okay, so thank you to our co-presenters, and further I am going to dealing with case examples and illustrations. So Romanticism across Europe, comparative study traces parallel developments and share aesthetic currents. So comparing the Romantic movement shows how similar intellectual emerges appear in multiple national literatures simultaneously, and Baudelaire's reading of Poe, Edgar Allan Poe, literary influence as a concrete cross-culture enrichment. So this example shows how one author's fascination with another produces new stylistic and thematic moves. And Joyce and Italo Svevo, Chaucer and Boccaccio, examples where multilingual sources and transmissions shape canonical text. So these textual genealogies reveal layered depths and highlight why knowing source context matters. And Lispector, Rice, Burns, Nin. So these lineage examples that show generated and minoritized affinities across geographies. So tracing such affinities helps recover marginal voices and how networks outside major canons. And post-colonial work, The Empire Writes Back, reframes a post-colonial critique as comparative practice. So post-colonial criticism often operates comparably by juxtaposing metropolitan text with colonial responses and rewritings. Then implications for teaching and research. So curriculum design. So integrate translation, history, reception, studies, and non-Western literatures to create comparative modules that reflect transfer and context. So practical courses should pair canonical texts with their local receptions and translated variants to show curriculation. Then research agendas. Prioritize projects that combine language competence, archival translation work, and global framing rather than single culture analysis. So robust comparativism needs linguistic work and archival attention to how texts moved and were received. Then interdisciplinarity. So collaborate with historians, anthropologists, and translation scholars to situate literature within cultural systems. And assessment and canon revision. So evaluate text on circulation and influence metrics and question inherited hierarchies. So pay attention to which works traveled and how they were transformed and why some become canonical while others remained marginal. Then pedagogical ethics. So teach students to read comparatively with sensitivity to power, colonial histories, and translation politics. So ethical teaching prepares students to notice asymmetries in textual exchange rather than just treating literary movement as neutral. Now, conclusion, synthesis and limits. So, synthesis. So, Besant urges reframing comparative literature as a dynamic, reader-centered method, then embraces translation and global plurality. So, the best path forward is a flexible method building that foregrounds reading acts, transfer, and planetary diversity. Then contribution. The article clarifies recurring debates and offers practical directions, translation partnership, non-Western growth, and methodological renewal. And limitations. So institutional decline is in some regions persistent Eurocentric frameworks and uneven language competence among scholars. So these structural obstacles slow renewal and require concrete institutional and training responses. And final prospect. So comparative literature will survive as a method and cross-disciplinary practice, especially when it responds to translation, post-colonial critique, and curricular decolonization. So the field's vitality depends on openness to other epistemologies and to centering transfer and planetary perspectives. And my learning outcomes. So I now regard comparative literature not as a declining departmental label, but as a resilient methodological practice that gains analytic power when it centers literary transfer, translation, and decolonial inquiry. So the case studies and Besant's synthesis showed me that how method, not institutional name, but determines value. Then close genealogies of influence. For example, Poe to Baudelaire and Joyce to Savevo convinced me that careful and small-scale tracing yields major interpretive and theoretical returns and can unsettle the TD national narratives. So these example make a practical case for archival and philosophical labor. And I am now more inclined to pursue targeted micro historical projects that map concrete networks of influence. Then engaging with ideology, canon, and translation sharpened my ethical stance. Comparative reading demands humility, reflexibility, and explicit accountability to source communities and translations. And practically, I will redesign research and pedagogy to foreground translation histories, non-Western canons, and the reader's active role while pressing for institutional investment in language training and archival access. So concretely, this means update syllabus, multilingual bibliographies, and research proposals that build cross-regional partnership and address the structural barriers that contains genuinely comparative work. Here are the references. Okay, thank you everyone. Now, if you have any questions.
Okay, so first question is from Krupali.
So my question is that what methodological trainings like language and translation studies should be prioritized for future comparatists?
So future comparatists need strong training in languages so they can read text in their original form, and they should also learn the history of translation to understand that how text travel and changes across culture. And this training should also include the basic translation practice or archival skills and exposure to global literary movements. And this program should help a student to gain both linguistic depth and cultural flexibility. So this combination prepares them to compare text both responsibly and as accurately.
So, Jay, my question is, how should comparative literature balance national specificity with world literary approaches and syllabuses?
So comparative literature should keep important texts of nation, but it's studied alongside foreign or translated works. So students get uh, both meanings, that local connection and as well as global connection. And syllabus should include modules. Syllabus should include some modules of one nation, as well as wider world movements, and as well as teachers should also explain clearly that why this text is in syllabus, so student get the purpose of it. Okay, thank you.
Okay, so very well prepared slides, good infographics were also used, and they were quite appropriate to the article. And the article gives us the debate about how it was declining in the Western world. But at the same time, it was seeing a new dawn in the colonized world, India, China. In those universities, comparative literature studies was growing. And along with that, the article concludes with the idea that we necessarily require translation studies going together. And also the debate whether comparative studies come under translation studies or vice versa. That is still going. The translators, they would say that comparative studies is a part of translation studies, and for many comparatists, translation studies is part of comparative studies. But we can say that both are inevitable, both are necessary, they go hand in hand. Together, we get an idea. Also, there were reference to syllabus and how the institutionalization of comparative studies is thought by the thinkers. In yesterday's article also we have seen this, that in Indian context, how the syllabus were designed keeping comparative studies in mind. Colonialism, post-colonialism is playing a very significant role in all these debates that also we are seeing subsequently. Good questions were also asked. Krupali asked to Rajdeep what methodological training in terms of languages, translation history should be prioritized for future comparatists. So it is interesting to see that people have to be multilingual. The more the people are multilingual, it is advantageous. Or those people who are by birth multilingual or growing into regions where multilingualism is a way of life, for them comparison becomes very interesting thing, and because translation becomes easy. History of translation is very important, even the history, because we will see in the classroom discussion that adaptation also is seen as translation. So if from pages to screen, from book to cinema, if that is what we call it as adaptation, it also is translation from one to another media. And the history plays a significant role of how people are seeing it time and again. In yesterday's discussion, we have two examples in terms of Romanticism and Shakespeare. How Shakespeare was adapted on Bengali stage, Bengali theatre, and in Gujarat, Parsi theatre, how they adopted Shakespeare. We have discussed earlier, many of you made presentations also on Shakespeare and Bollywood. or how Vishal Bhardwaj made several films based on Shakespeare's things. So how is he translating? So if we keep these points together, like what Bengali theater did, what Parsi theater did, and what Bollywood is doing, so we get three important points in seeing the history of translation in different ways there. So that is a very important methodological concern for this. Bhumi also asked a good question on how should comparative literature balance national specificity with world literature. So you are walking on a tight rope, and you have to balance between both the things. That's what Amiya Dev and Sisir Kumar Das, they were trying to do that, reminding time and again that we should not become parochial, we should not become chauvinistic, we should not become dogmatist when we talk about national literature. We have to keep our national identities open for global outlook. We have to talk about national literatures, but not in a way that we shut down the global perspectives out of our thinking. So that way, it's walking on a tightrope. Balancing both the things are necessary. Keeping in mind, as Amiya Dev and Sisir Kumar Das told, that be careful. Even Uma Shankar Joshi's reference we have taken, that we do not become dogmatic, we do not become chauvinistic, we do not become narrow-minded, parochial in any terms when we talk about regional or national literature. So that's how we have to have our approach for comparative literatures and translations also. Okay, we continue our discussion in the classroom.